Welcome to another episode of Philosophical Frontiers. Today we are diving deep into one of the most polarizing and heavily debated topics in modern society, but we are going to look at it through a very specific, highly influential, and honestly quite counterintuitive lens. We are exploring Don Marquis's landmark, 1989 paper, Why Abortion is Immoral, published in the Journal of Philosophy. If you think you already know all the arguments surrounding abortion, usually split between religious sanctity of life on one side and bodily autonomy or personhood on the other, you might want to brace yourself. Marquis completely bypasses both of those traditional camps to forge a radical third path. To help unpack this dense and highly structured argument, I am joined by my co-host. Let's start right at the foundation. How does Marquis even begin to tackle something so entrenched?
It is great to be here. You are absolutely right about Marquis forging a third path. What makes this 1989 paper so brilliant is its starting point. Marquis actually begins by adopting a major assumption shared by some of the most insightful philosophers on the ethics of abortion, people like Joel Feinberg, Michael Tooley, Mary Ann Warren, John T. Noonan Jr., and Philip Devine. The shared premise is that whether abortion is morally permissible stands or falls on whether a fetus is the sort of being whose life it is seriously wrong to end. Marquis does not actually argue for this premise, he accepts it as the battleground. But instead of getting bogged down in the endless biological or metaphysical debates about when personhood begins, he flips the script. He asks a deceptively simple question: why is it wrong to kill us? Why is it wrong to kill you or me, an innocent adult human being?
That is a great hook. Before we can figure out if abortion is wrong, we need a theoretical account of why killing in general is wrong. So, how does he answer that? Because I imagine the immediate answers people might throw out are actually the ones he rejects.
Exactly. He explicitly eliminates two common but flawed answers. First, someone might say killing is wrong because it brutalizes the killer. But Marquis points out that this is backward. The act brutalizes the killer precisely because it is already hideously immoral. It does not explain the immorality itself. Second, people might say killing is wrong because of the immense grief and loss experienced by the victim's friends and family. But if that were the primary reason, then it would be perfectly fine to kill a hermit who lives in total isolation and has no friends. Since we know killing a hermit is still fundamentally wrong, the core wrongness must lie elsewhere. Marquis concludes that what primarily makes killing wrong is its effect on the victim. Specifically, killing deprives the victim of their future. It takes away all the experiences, activities, projects, and enjoyments that would have otherwise constituted their future life. This is the absolute cornerstone of his paper, which we call the future like ours theory, or the FLOV theory for short. You are depriving someone of a valuable future.
The future like ours theory. FLOV. So it is not just about stopping a biological heartbeat, it is about stealing everything they could have ever experienced or valued. That logically leads to the next phase of his argument. Marquis outlines 4 distinct advantages to this FLOV theory to prove it is the most robust explanation for the wrongness of killing. Let's walk through those, because they really demonstrate the explanatory power of this framework.
They absolutely do. The first advantage of the FLOV theory is that it perfectly explains why we generally regard murder as the worst of all crimes. Other crimes deprive you of a fraction of your well-being or property, but killing deprives you of literally everything you could ever have. The second advantage is that it aligns perfectly with the intuitions of people who are dying. If you talk to someone with terminal cancer, they do not just lament their present pain, they mourn the loss of the future they will not get to experience. FLOV captures that tragedy exactly.
Those two make perfect intuitive sense. But the third advantage is where Marquis shows how intellectually flexible his theory is, and it actually pulls him away from traditional anti-abortion arguments. He talks about extraterrestrials, right?
Yes, the alien argument. The third advantage is that the FLOV theory is not speciesist. Many traditional sanctity of life arguments claim that human biological life has unique, exclusive moral worth. But Marquis says, if we discover an alien species from another planet, and their members have a future of experiences and enjoyments like ours, it would be seriously wrong to kill them too. The moral wrongness comes from the valuable future, not from having human DNA. And the fourth advantage is that FLOV straightforwardly explains why it is wrong to kill infants and young children. Personhood theories which require a being to have rationality, self-awareness, or a concept of self to be granted a right to life struggle heavily with infants. They often have to bolt on ad hoc, desperate exceptions to explain why infanticide is wrong. FLOV does not need any ad hoc additions. A baby obviously has a future of value, so killing it is wrong.
That is a massive blow to strict personhood theories, but it brings up a crucial question regarding the fetus. How does Marquis justify extending this right to a fetus without falling back on the concept of personhood? Because that is the trap most pro-life arguments fall into.
This is where Marquis uses a brilliant structural analogy with animal cruelty. Think about the ethical arguments against inflicting pain on animals. We do not require a dog or a cow to possess rational personhood to agree that torturing them is wrong. Instead, we start with an unproblematic premise in our own case: causing needless pain to humans is wrong. We identify the natural property that makes it wrong, the conscious experience of suffering, and then we extend that protection to non-human animals who share that natural property. Marquis uses the exact same methodological structure for abortion. He starts with our own case: killing us is wrong. He identifies the natural property that makes it wrong, the deprivation of a future like ours. He then simply extends that logic to the fetus. The fetus possesses that exact same natural property. It has a future of value. Therefore, you do not need to establish that the fetus is a person in the psychological sense at all. You just need to recognize the natural property of its future.
That is incredibly elegant logic. It totally sidesteps the theological and metaphysical gridlock. But in philosophy, whenever you introduce a new theory, you have to defend it against existing competitors. I know Marquis specifically tackles two rival theories in the paper: the desire account and the discontinuation account. Let's start with the desire account. What is it, and why does Marquis think it fails?
The desire account is a very popular rival theory. It argues that what makes killing wrong is that it thwarts the victim's strong fundamental desire to continue living. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. If you apply that to a fetus, the fetus has no conscious desires, so killing it wouldn't be wrong. But Marquis destroys this theory by pointing out its fatal flaw in adult human cases. Think about someone who is deeply depressed and actively suicidal, or someone who is temporarily comatose. They currently have absolutely no desire to live. Yet, we fundamentally believe it is still seriously wrong to murder a comatose or suicidal person. Why? Because the value of their future is still there, waiting for them, even if they cannot currently desire it. For Marquis, the objective value of the future is primary. The subjective desire for it is secondary.
Wow, so the desire account collapses under its own weight when faced with temporary unconsciousness or depression. What about the other competitor, the discontinuation account?
The discontinuation account argues that killing is wrong because it discontinues the experiences, activities, and projects of the victim's past. The idea is that you are interrupting an ongoing life narrative. If this is true, a fetus has no past experiences to discontinue, so abortion would be fine. But Marquis counters this by pointing out the asymmetry of time. When we mourn a death, we do not mourn the past is already gone. We mourn what was to come. If someone has a terrible past but a bright, wonderful future ahead of them, killing them is still deeply wrong. It is the future value that does the moral heavy lifting, not the continuity of the past.
Okay, but this brings us to some very specific, highly technical objections raised by other philosophers. I am thinking of the argument that value implies a valuer, and closely related to that is Paul Bassen's argument about victimizability. How does Marquis deal with the objection that an embryo, which lacks sentience, simply cannot be a victim?
You are hitting on the most sophisticated pushbacks in the literature. John C. Stevens and others have raised this value implies a value objection, arguing that a future can only be valuable if there is a conscious agent currently capable of valuing it. Similarly, Paul Bassen argues for victimizability, the idea that an embryo lacks the sentience required to be a victim of a harm. You cannot victimize a rock, and Bassen argues you cannot victimize a non-sentient embryo. Marquis's rebuttal is highly consistent with his previous points. He argues that a future can be valuable to a being, even if that being is not currently aware of it. He goes back to the temporarily comatose patient. That patient lacks current sentience and cannot currently value anything. Yet, if you pull the plug on a temporarily comatose patient who would have fully recovered, you have absolutely made them a victim, and you have deprived them of a valuable future. The capacity to be a victim does not require current conscious awareness. It only requires that the loss of the future is a loss to that specific biological entity.
That makes sense within his framework. But now, I have to throw the ultimate curveball at Marquis. If the core moral wrong is depriving something of a future like ours, doesn't this logically mean that contraception is immoral? I mean, a sperm and an egg, left to their own devices in the right environment, have a future of value. Does Marquis's theory accidentally turn birth control into murder? Because that is a key testing point for many of these theories.
This is arguably Marquis's signature contribution, and it is a brilliant piece of logical deduction in part 5 of his paper. He emphatically says no, FLOV does not entail that contraception is wrong. His reasoning is strictly logical. For the FLOV theory to apply, there must be a specific, arbitrarily identifiable subject that is being harmed. In a successful abortion, the subject being deprived is clear. It is the fetus. But in the case of contraception, Who exactly is the subject being deprived of a future? Is it the individual sperm? There are millions of them. Picking one is totally arbitrary. Is it the unfertilized egg? Again, arbitrary. Is it the sperm and the egg separately? If so, then contraception deprives two subjects of a future, but a human only has one future, so the math doesn't work. What about the combination of the sperm and the egg? Marquis points out that at the time contraception is used, that combination does not actually exist yet as a unified subject, since there is no actual non-arbitrarily identifiable subject in existence to be deprived of a future. Contraception does no moral harm.
That is a fascinating escape hatch. It is entirely based on the ontology of the subject. You cannot rob a bank if the bank hasn't been built yet. So, taking all of this into account, the flaw theory, the animal analogy, the defeat of rival theories, and the contraception defense, where does Marquis ultimately land in his conclusion? Does he claim to have absolutely proven that every single abortion is murder?
This is a critical nuance, and it shows his rigor as an academic philosopher. Marquis does not claim to have offered absolute proof, and he does not say abortion is always unequivocally wrong without exception. His exact phrasing is that abortion is prima facie seriously wrong. That means there is a very strong presumption of moral wrongness, placing it in the exact same moral category as killing an innocent adult human being. However, prima facie means that this presumption can, in theory, be overridden. He explicitly acknowledges that abortion could be justified by compelling reasons in rare cases, for instance, perhaps when the mother's life is immediately threatened. But he firmly maintains that the overwhelming majority of deliberate abortions are seriously immoral.
It really is a remarkable piece of philosophy. What stands out to me most is how this argument refuses to fit neatly into our modern political boxes. It does not support the absolute sanctity of life because, as Marquis notes, the flaw theory actually permits active euthanasia. If a terminally ill patient faces a future of only pain and despair, they do not have a future like ours of value, so assisting their death does not deprive them of a valuable future. Yet, simultaneously, it rejects the pro-choice reliance on personhood and cognitive requirements. It literally carves out a distinct, standalone space.
Exactly. It forces readers to step outside their entrenched ideological camps. You don't need religious dogma, you don't need a soul, you don't need the fetus to be a rational person, and you don't have to condemn contraception or euthanasia. You just have to agree that depriving a being of a valuable future is the ultimate wrong. That is what makes Don Marquis's paper a staple in ethical philosophy to this day. You might not ultimately agree with his conclusion, but you cannot simply brush it aside. You have to wrestle with the logic of the future.
Wrestling with the logic of the future. I think that is the perfect note to end on. It challenges us to rethink not just the ethics of abortion, but the very foundation of why human life, or any life with a future, holds value. Thank you for walking us through this incredible piece of philosophical architecture. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time on Philosophical Frontiers, where we keep pushing the boundaries of how we think.